Week 5, lipids. When someone says, hey, you shouldn't eat that, it's high in fat, I want you to think, what kind of fat? It's the first thing that should come to your mind. There are good fats and bad fats. Our body needs fats, not only for energy, but for membranes, nourishes, and to absorb essential nutrients. You'll hear the word fat throughout the class, but really, fat is more of a layman's term. The category of fats is called lipids. And there are 3 groups of lipids: triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols. Phospholipids are emulsifiers, and cholesterol is an example of a sterol. And triglycerides are what we refer to as fat. Triglycerides are the fats in our body and the fats we eat in food products. Triglycerides are made up of fatty acids, and fatty acids come in 2 basic forms: unsaturated fatty acids, liquids, think oil, and saturated fatty acids, solids, think butter. The unsaturated fatty acids are broken down into 2 groups: mono, 1 double bond, and poly, more than 1 double bond. The essential fatty acids are polyunsaturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids, and it's okay to refer to them as saturated fats, are generally not healthy, whereas unsaturated fats are generally healthy. Well, what about trans fats? Where do they fit in? Trans fats do not occur in nature. Well, they do, but to a very small extent. Trans fats are mostly a man-made creation. Turn to page 159 in your book. In this diagram, you can see manufacturers hydrogenate fats to make them more stable. Oils are not very stable and cannot last long in processed foods without spoiling. So, to increase the shelf life of processed foods, manufacturers hydrogenate unsaturated fats. This makes a trans fat. To do this, they take an unsaturated fatty acid and hydrogenate it by adding hydrogen under pressure. This creates a saturated fat and a trans fat. A trans fat is unsaturated, but is flipped and looks more like a saturated fat than an unsaturated fat. Unfortunately, in the body, trans fats are much worse for our body than saturated fat. They increase heart disease by raising LDL and lowering HDL, and by increasing inflammation. So, when you see hydrogenated soybean oil on a package, don't think, oh gee, it's soy, it must be healthy. Think trans fat. If the label says no trans fat, check the serving size. If there's less than 1 gram per serving, they can list this as 0. But if the serving size is small and you can eat the entire container of 12, you could be eating 10 grams of trans fat. Another important point in this lecture is understanding cholesterol. One of the most confusing things for students is the concept that cholesterol that we eat does not have much effect on our blood cholesterol. To make things even more confusing, cholesterol doesn't even really travel in our blood. And when they measure cholesterol in our blood, they're not really measuring cholesterol. Okay, that is confusing. Cholesterol is just one part of a lipoprotein, which carries protein, cholesterol, triglycerides, and phospholipids. Turn to page 151 and look at the diagram seen here. This is a lipoprotein. As you can see, cholesterol is only one small part of the lipoprotein. This big beach ball looking thing is what carries lipids and protein through the bloodstream. Remember when I talked about that oil being cleaned off the dirty plate with a sponge? You need a detergent to bring the fat into water and to be able to wash off that oil. It's the same thing with fats in our body. Think of a bottle of oil and vinegar. Where does the oil sit? On top. Same thing in our body. If the fats floated freely in our blood system, they would just sit on top of the blood and they would get clogged up and nowhere to go. Kind of like pouring down a bunch of bacon fat down your drain. It would just stick to the sides. All the water in the world isn't going to wash it down. This is why our body has a packaging system, to carry lipids through the bloodstream. The phospholipids are water-soluble and fat-soluble, and allow the packaging system to work. HDL is a high-density lipoprotein. It is small, more compact, and carries more protein and less cholesterol. It scavenges cholesterol from the bloodstream and brings it back to the liver to be dismantled or utilized for something else. LDL, on the other hand, is larger and carries more cholesterol. It is packaged in the liver and designed to carry cholesterol and triglycerides to other tissues. Remember, tissues need these lipids, but only so many of them. There's a direct link between low HDL and high LDL to heart disease risk, even more so than total cholesterol, which still isn't really measuring cholesterol. But there's a very little correlation between eating cholesterol and high levels of total cholesterol, LDL. There is an exception to a few people with a genetic tendency. What does increase LDL and total cholesterol is saturated fats and trans fats. Lastly, there's information in the lecture notes that is not in the book, and this is on essential fatty acids. I think it's very important to understand, but I'm not going to go into detail here. What I mainly want you to understand is that most Americans eat more omega-6 fatty acids than omega-3 fatty acids. This is because omega-6 fatty acids are mostly in processed foods. An imbalance of omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3s in our body, with more omega-6 fatty acids, and remember these are polyunsaturated fatty acids that are part of triglycerides, results in inflammation and clotting, both of which contribute to the development of heart disease and other chronic diseases. So please make sure that you remember to review this in the lecture notes.